So I would say many of you can guess this about me, especially if you've watched this program for a while. But if you're new to the channel, there is this big phenomenon, blessing and curse in my life. And it's the fact that I just don't have an off switch like ever. It'll be 2:30 in the morning and I'm bouncing off the walls, coming up with content ideas and pondering about life and theories, usually that surround college football. And a few nights ago, my brain got hooked onto one theory describing the future of the SEC and how it will be affected by the 12-team college football playoff picture. So we know for a fact that the SEC is the best conference in college football. That's not me saying it. That's not you saying it. That's metrics backing it up. But unfortunately, life is not fair. And the College Football Playoff Committee wants to create a fair, balanced number of teams per conference to be represented in the dozen dance. So for the SEC, what's really interesting is that if you want to have the most representation guaranteed, you're probably kind of rooting for an underdog to win in Atlanta. And let's go and discuss. So what's going on, SEC Unfiltered? It's Cole Thompson here. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification down below because we're talking SEC football nonstop leading up to week 1. Download the podcast version of the show. Hit subscribe here, subscribe over there. Make sure that you're subscribed on all the social media platforms. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. You want to yell at me? It's at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, visit SECUnfiltered.com. This episode's brought to you by RHOBACK. Look good, feel good this upcoming fall at RHOBACK.com by using the promo code SECU for 20% off all joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. Promo code SECU at RHOBACK.com. Now let's just get this out of the way. You naturally are going to root for your school to come out on top over anybody in Atlanta. If you're Georgia, if you're Texas, if you're Alabama, if you're Tennessee, if you're Auburn, if you're Ole Miss, if you're Texas A&M, you want your squad to be the team that's hoisting up the conference title. I get that, and that's very fair. But the problem is that there are going to be people who just want to see the SEC be the most represented conference. And that's because of they are the best. And that's, again, not either of us saying it. That's reality speaking it. Every team ranked in the top 16 of the SEC, so every squad, has a top 30 strength of schedule going into 2024. Every team. Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Kentucky, Texas A&M, Texas. Some of them have top 5 schedules. Florida has the toughest schedule I've ever seen in my life, but pulling up the rear are Oklahoma and Georgia. So you know for a fact that there is going to be rigorous competition. But what we also know is that, unfortunately, even though 10-2 feels like a prominent number where you would feel confident you're making the college football playoff, that might not be good enough for several squads. It will for Georgia. Absolutely, it will for Georgia. If they find a way to lose 2 games, whether it be to Texas and Tennessee or Texas and Ole Miss, or maybe it's Clemson and Tennessee, they still would have the non-conference wins or the conference wins that were bountiful enough to push them over the edge. The same thing goes for Texas. If they were to lose to, say, Michigan and Texas A&M, wins over Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida would probably be enough. If you were Alabama, I'd go in the same pathway. You get a non-conference game against Wisconsin that might benefit you very well. Let's say you lose to Georgia and you lose to Tennessee. You still got wins over Missouri and LSU, who both are probably going to be top 25 rosters, Oklahoma and Auburn to close out the year. But everyone else, it's not a guarantee. What I will say is that when you have another factor thrown into the mix that nobody wants to talk about, it's going to hurt the SEC. Now, I don't think it would hurt major programs on the come up, such as Tennessee and in Oklahoma. Tennessee is humming at the right time. They have a good schedule. They have the quarterback that will put butts in the seats. And more importantly, they also have the history aspect. And the same thing goes for Oklahoma. Whether or not Sooner fans or outside Sooner fans want to admit it, Oklahoma is joining the SEC because of their pedigree and their pageantry as much as their persistence and their success over the last 5 decades. So they're going to be a part of this. They have a schedule that would also guarantee them a spot in the postseason with 10 wins. You think about that for a second. You know that Ole Miss is going to be good. You know Tennessee is going to be promising. You know Texas is going to be good. You know Auburn's going to be fine. You know Missouri and Alabama are going to be great. And LSU is the same thing. And honestly, you could probably throw LSU into the mix as well because of what they've done, who they are, who's their head coach. But all those teams also will bring in ratings. And ratings are a big deal for those that are making the money. and those who are profiting off of the games. Ratings always play a factor. And whether or not you want to admit it, it's partially why you didn't see Florida State get in. You watched what happened to TCU against Georgia in the national championship when you saw a lesser tier opponent go toe-to-toe with the tyrant. And sometimes, unfortunately, whether we agree that that's the right move, it is the harsh reality. People want to be mad that Florida State didn't get in because they were an undefeated roster. They didn't get in because they were insufficient on the most important game of the year, even though it wasn't promised from the get-go. So naturally, if you don't have the roster that will put you on the field and you don't have the ratings to back it up, it hurts your case. Do you feel that way if you're Ole Miss, where honestly 2 of your biggest games are probably going to be against Georgia and LSU, and then you don't know what you're going to get with the rest of the SEC? You don't know if Florida is going to be good. You don't know if you're going to see a prominent version of South Carolina. You don't know what Oklahoma is going to be. 8-4, 9-3, 10-2, 7-5. It's somewhere in the middle. And what if you don't get a win over the opponents that you're supposed to? So at that point, now you feel like that it's no longer viewed as a promising team. But you can't say that about a place like Miami. Miami can go 10-2, and because of the fact that they're Miami, they're the U, they're the big brand, they're the orange and green, they come from the ACC, they cross off a couple boxes, they would get in because of naturally ratings matter. And the same thing would go for Florida State or a Clemson over maybe a Missouri. If Missouri loses 2 games, who are the 2 losses to? Do they have that standout win over an Alabama, over an Oklahoma, over potentially a Texas A&M? Is Texas A&M as good as we think that they're going to be in 2024? Clemson will be, because Clemson may have one of the best losses in college football this year. Penn State at 10-2, it feels like an oxymoron to leave them out because of even if we disagree that they're a team that should be battle tested with their schedule, prominent roster, prominent ratings, big time program, Big Ten backing. They want to have expectations too. Maybe you won't get that in the Big 12, even though the Big 12 to me feels like the most competitively even balanced conference. But at the same time, you will get that with the ACC. You'll get that with the Big Ten. They'll come up with excuses to make sure that 4 Big Ten squads get in, at least 2 ACC squads get in. Not to mention Notre Dame. You don't think that the Golden Domers would flood to a visiting stadium on the first round to be able to see a top team go toe-to-toe against them? They would easily fly in from South Bend, Indiana, or wherever the hell they claim their fake fan base from. That's the bottom line. So when you get a team like, let's just say, an Auburn this year, or maybe it is an Oklahoma, or maybe it's an Ole Miss, or maybe it's a Texas A&M, or maybe it's a Mizzou, win the SEC. Well, you know that you're not going to hurt if you're Alabama at 10-2. You know you're not going to hurt if you're Texas at 10-2. You probably won't hurt if you're Tennessee at 10-2. You won't if you're Oklahoma at 10-2, and you won't if you're Georgia at 10-2. All of those teams would still have the schedule to back it up to say, yeah, we're really good. And by the way, the teams that we lost to, look at where they finished, right alongside us. You can't put them in and not leave us out because of what happens if we beat them one weekend. Is that good enough for you? What happens there? But when you have a team like a Texas win the SEC in year 1 or Georgia win the SEC in year 1, and now you're looking at a 10-2 roster of Ole Miss that maybe loses to Oklahoma, wins on the road against LSU, but also loses to Georgia, is that enough to guarantee their spot compared to a Miami that's 10-2 or potentially a Notre Dame that's 10-2? Or how about we go ahead and just say, God bless almighty, Colorado at 10-2. We all know that last one's fake, but you get my drift here. Ratings are a major factor. But you know, like how every single year or every once in a blue moon, we'll see just this epic run on conference weekend in the SEC baseball tournament or the Big 12 basketball tournament or the ACC baseball tournament, whatever it may be. And eventually they end up hoisting the crown. Well, you can't take them out because they've already guaranteed their spot with the conference title, which means you're going to have to funnel your way around to be able to guarantee other teams to get in because they had the certain criteria met during the regular season. That's the same thing with the SEC, where you can make the case that easily a Mizzou wins while you're not leaving 4 teams out that had a better strength of record, and they also played up to the standard at 10-2. You can't say the same thing about Ole Miss either because when you put them in, Georgia, Alabama, potentially LSU, Oklahoma, depending on what their record is, Texas, Tennessee, they're going to make an argument. Texas A&M surprising the college football landscape at 10-2 doesn't affect anyone else it only affects them in a prominent light. So I'm just saying, my theory is that the SEC, if you're just wanting to see the most representation, make sure that the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10 know that you're actually running the show and that you're the one that's needed. You actually are kind of internally, outside of your own program, rooting for an underdog to win because of the big squats, the blue bloods, the faces of the SEC. They're not being left out. There's no reason to worry about them. But if an Ole Miss is left out, that likely means the ACC is getting another squad, even if they don't belong. Maybe that means that Notre Dame is going to the playoff, even if they don't belong. Maybe that means the Big 10 is getting a 9-3 roster in just to make it more evenly balanced. Ugh, just gross words like that. At some point, whether or not you want to admit it, you kind of deep down inside, outside of your squad, want the underdog to pull off the upset. Because at least then, everyone knows that in the SEC, it truly just means more. And that means that you have more representation on a 12-team postseason picture. But let me know in the comments section down below. Am I onto something here? Am I just losing my brain? Am I actually making sense on this point? Is this just a dumb theory because of I can't fall asleep? Make sure that also you're following us on all of the social media channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Make sure that you're following us on the podcast version of the show. Leave us a 5-star review if you love this type of content. Leave us a 1-star review if you hate this type of content. Follow me on social media at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, visit SECunfiltered.com. I'm Cole Thompson. Until next time, folks. Later.